Hey guys, welcome back to Center Stage. Today we're going to be talking about racism. I'm Danielle, and I want to focus on cultural appropriation as well as the concept of white supremacy.
I'm Tanisha. I was in the first podcast we ever made, and now I'm back on to discuss racism, especially in like today's society. And I think I want to try and focus on the historical relevance of racial discrimination in the US particularly, because that's kind of like my expertise-ish. And then like how it's transgressed to today.
Okay. Hi, I'm Pippa. I was in our last two podcasts on sexism and inequalities surrounding coronavirus, and I'd like to talk about in particular white fragility and how white people get in the way of revolutionary reform.
Hi, I'm Misha. This is the first podcast that I'm in, and I'd like to focus on how we can go about making change in terms of reform and revolution.
Hi, I'm Maya. I was in the first podcast, and I just don't like racism, so here I am.
I think the first thing that we can start talking about is how has history shaped racism that we see today?
Colonization.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Europeans going over to Africa, and not only to mention Africa, but South America as well, India, taking the natural resources, the people, inducing slavery. Obviously, we have the transatlantic slavery, and then that premise of white superiority, then transgressing through the ages, even past the abolition of slavery, into Reconstruction in America, so the period after slavery was abolished, and kind of instilling these mentalities of, again, white superiority. And there was no actual like attempt by the white government and the systems within the US to reform their systems and to make life easier for the black people who had been enslaved in the past and who now were not slaves. It kind of just, I don't know how to explain it, but it kind of spiraled from there.
Because it's been a part of the system for how many years? Like, it's embedded within American government system, and of course, obviously, the English all over the. It kind of has been able to just pass by without no one noticing, with a few hiccups here and there, with like the rise of media and people videoing what's going on and seeing it. Because the thing is, it's not like it's a new thing; it's been going on for years. It's getting caught on camera, and people are seeing.
Yeah, and it's worth saying with the US system, it's like particularly entrenched. So we've got like a bit more flexibility with our law changing and stuff because we've got a parliamentary democracy. But in the US, their constitution's like entrenched, it's codified, so it's deliberately made so that like founding fathers' intentions are upheld, which is from like the 1700s. And obviously in the 1700s, it wasn't a great place for people who were black. So
with the 13th Amendment, I don't know if you guys watched 13th on Netflix, but like I watched it a couple of years ago, and then obviously again with everything kind of rising, I decided to watch it again. And that actual 13th Amendment, I have it up on here, so I'm just going to read it because it completely like baffled me when I saw it, the fact that this hasn't been reformed. So it says that neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States, which basically means that slavery and involuntary servitude are not legal unless you've been convicted of a crime and are incarcerated. Therefore, the prison system is literally just the modern day slavery, which to me, when I looked at, was like disgusting. Because when you again look at the rate of black people who are incriminated and incarcerated over the most petty crimes, especially if we go back to the Reagan's war on drugs and like back to Bush and stuff, with people literally having to serve about 10 years for possession of 1 gram of marijuana. Like when we go back to the foundation of why these systems were put in place, is to incarcerate the black population within America, which is fundamentally racist. And the fact that no one's reformed these like old school rules yet is beyond me.
yeah, and another amendment is supposed to be like freedom from cruel and unusual punishment, but how can enslavement not be cruel and unusual?
Yeah, it kind of baffles me as well how like in the modern day there's still people who fight for these amendments. Like, okay, this should be part of our like society because it's our history, it's our founding fathers, da 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 da. But then when you like look at the actual roots of everything, if the fundamental roots aren't based on like positive affirmations and like something that's going to transgress into something good, then why keep them there?
I was going to say, it's because America, it's a civil religion. Their patriotism is so strong in America. Like, being American, that's it for them. I am American. It's such a strong and, like, they're proud to be it. And so that's why it's so hard to change and create new laws and new systems in America, because what it is to be American is all of what's happening today. And the changes, you know, I feel for those who stand with America and stand with these laws, which I don't understand why you would. It's embedded in them. It's their norms. It's their ideology. They've grown up all their lives. Yeah.
And they're trying to like fight with cultural relativism, like saying this is our tradition, when really no one's stating it's actually white superiority. Like that's their tradition.
Yeah, and then they allow their kids to have the exact same mentality as them. Like they literally go and say, look, you have to be like proud to be American, there's completely nothing wrong, and they completely like excuse the fact that there are so many things wrong, and that, you know, Donald Trump idea of make America great again, it was never great in the first place. Like, I'm sorry, it really wasn't. So it's just, it doesn't really make any sense to me. And the other thing that I was going to say was there's the concept of being like colorblind. So essentially, white people always used to use the concept of race in order to systematically benefit white people, even from just like the colonial era. So then when overt racism, so like killing black people, like lynching, all of that kind of stuff became socially unacceptable, after all of that inequality was already like deeply entrenched, they switched to being colorblind and not address the fact that there is this societal like inequality.
The whole concept of colorblind, it genuinely baffles me when I see white people that are like, oh no, I don't see race. And it's like, what? Like, I remember, and I think I told Danielle about this, I posted something about white privilege in my story, and it angered a few white people. And then one white guy messaged me and went, you should just, you know, not post stuff like that, because that way no one gets angry.
The fact that you even said that, like, you have this anecdote, and like so many people that I know have the same like reaction from white people. Like, for example, my friend was talking, and she wanted to go to one of the protests, like in Windsor, and then she was telling her friends about it, a predominantly white friendship group, and a lot of them were just like, I mean, you know, it's kind of ridiculous that we're in the middle of a pandemic and people are going out protesting. Meanwhile, they're in a car with 7 other people in McDonald's.
Yeah, there was a Conservative MP who tweeted like saying, don't be surprised if there's like a second wave or whatever.
It's ridiculous to me. And it's like, again, from the highest echelons in society, they're still not even respecting the fact that this movement is necessary. People aren't just like making this decision of like, oh, let's just go to a protest. It demonstrates the dire need for change. Like the fact that people are willing to risk infecting themselves along with their family members, along with everyone else at the protest. They're willing to risk their lives to fight for something they believe in. And if people at the in government are not understanding that, then it just leads back to the question of like, do we need to change our government? Who needs to be in government? Yeah.
I think people forget is that this isn't like white people versus black people. This isn't people of color versus, this is a collective versus systems of oppression. This is what this is. This isn't race versus race, ethnicity versus ethnicity, you versus me. It's, we're coming for those in power who are predominantly white, but we're coming for them now because we see you have for hundreds of years have held these institutions like the education system, the criminal justice system, the government itself, the prison system. All these systems are there in order to keep the people in power. And finally people are starting to wake up. But I think what the media likes to do to try and stop this is go, oh no, look, it's white versus black, it's him versus her, it's you versus them, creating that kind of us versus them mentality, which creates conflict between us when it should be conflict between us and them.
Yeah, I kind of agree with that as well. But I feel like as well, whilst it's not like a white and black sort of situation, like it's us versus them, I do feel like because of the fact that the systems that are in place imposed by white people and upheld by white people, it does become more like, for a lot of people that are really staunch on this, on the protests and like with their emotions and their feelings, like it does become that kind of problem, which I feel like we need to understand, because from a lot of people's perspectives, like imagine the family of those that have been affected by police brutality. Like I think when you are put in a position where your literal, like your loved ones are being taken away, you do develop that us versus them mentality, which we can't discredit, because you're entitled to feel like that if your whole life has been oppressed by the white people in power. But I don't agree with the whole, like, as protesters, like, oh, you're white, you can't join our protest, like, that needs to be eradicated, because I do see that often as well, which kind of confuses me. But
when like white people aren't doing anything, I'm like, it's so incentive that you do, because like you have the privilege, which is so wrong. Like the movement shouldn't be powered from us, but like it needs to be, because that's where we like exist in society.
So back to the like idea of white privilege and having to use that to defend those who are ultimately being oppressed. That was like, I saw a lot of pictures of like a line of white people in front of the black protesters, obviously defending them against like the police, like the rubber bullets, the tear gas, something like that. And just even that picture made such a statement, that the fact that a string of white people was used to protect the black people was just really eye-opening, because it's like, had that been the other way around, they wouldn't have given a fuck. Like they would have just been like, cool, let's just charge into them. Because
it shows you the existence of white privilege, 100%. And it just baffles me when white people get angry or upset when you say that they have white privilege, because it's like, so many are ignorant in the fact that they think we're dismissing their problems and we're dismissing the problems they face. We're not. We're saying, listen, you face problems just as much as I face problems, but you're never going to face a problem because of the colour of your skin. That is what white privilege is. And you are going to have some advantages because of the colour of your skin. Yeah. Like, it's not missing your problems. And I think a lot of people who get angry at it seem to not understand that.
It's the same people who also dismiss like the whole entire Black Lives Matter movement and say that all lives matter. Like, it doesn't make any sense to me, because at the end of the day, like we know that everyone has problems, but it's not about the fact that everyone has problems. It's the fact that those who have bigger problems and are being oppressed are not actually being taken into consideration as much as they should be, and that's where the problem lies.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. You're not going to solve anything by saying everything's shit. You need to like home in on all these individual things. Like when someone was saying to me like all lives matter, I was like, say if we're going to say like we need to reform the UK system, we wouldn't just say the UK system sucks. We'd say, let's look at the electoral systems, let's look at Parliament, let's look at its key institutions. Like you've got to home in on the individual institutions to reform them.
100%. They're all stepping stones to a better world, to a more just society. We have to fix them one at a time, and that's the way it works. I mean, unless y'all want to revolt and destroy everything, that is another option, and it is a viable option. But
I mean, that is kind of like the option that I feel like a lot of people share right now, because I think it's because of that pent up anger. There's like 400-500 years of just anger and like oppression, and this consistent systemic like problem is built up, and like now people aren't just like in the civil rights movement, they were like, we're protesting, but we were asking like without a massive like heap of violence. Like it was always asking. It was like little demonstrations. It was kneeling at football games. It was like talking, having conversations with officials in charge, but nothing worked. So at this point, people are protesting, and protesting hard, because this seems to be the only thing that the government wake up to. So especially like a lot of people have been talking about the lootings and stuff as well, and there's been like kind of two sides to this in terms of like one's detracting from the movement, the actual message and what you're trying to say, and there's one that's just like, yeah, well, you've looted from our countries, all this, like, you've looted my fucking life, so we're going to do the same to you.
Yeah.
And I don't know where I find myself in that balance, because whilst like I completely understand it, like especially the aggression, the anger, I kind of do like warm to the side of, to what extent will the lootings actually like detract from the movement, like in terms of like having to appeal to the officials and stuff like that are going to end up ultimately making the changes.
Yeah.
Will looting and like a lot of violence ultimately lead to change? I don't know.
And like hopelessness comes from what we said about people not accepting their privilege and the white fragility of like refusing to accept it. And sadly, like, well, not sadly, it's great that we have democracy, but you need a consensus from like the majority in the US majority to get such changes through, even from like white people. So like, I don't know, you got to speak to them in the language that they understand, I guess.
Yeah.
I think in writing, I'm all for the violence, but against I think I don't agree against it against like small owned businesses, against houses and of the general population. If you are, do it to government buildings, do it to mass corporations and multinational corporation buildings, do it to Tesco's, do it to fucking Sainsbury's. Don't do it to, you know, Uncle's corner shop down the road. He hasn't really done anything, has he? Like,
yeah, no. Or like immigrants who've like opened, I know, nail bars and like eyebrow threading parlours.
So what are you going to loot from a nail bar anyway? Like, I'd rather go to Argos and get myself like a new set of speakers or something.
Yeah, I don't know. I think this whole thing I've been really like conflicted as to where I sit, because whilst like I understand the need to like express your anger and aggression, I do feel like in order to invoke proper systemic change, like there needs to be a leader, there needs to be like a set of premises, like what you want, and there needs to be like the people that to then enforce that, like the masses. And I feel like right now, like it's getting towards that, but like I feel like there needs to be a fundamental like kind of group sort of.
So just to add on to that, I don't know whether you've seen it a lot online, but basically in terms of the looting, after Martin Luther King was assassinated, they caused about $47 million worth of damage within about 6 days. And within those 6 days, that's when the Civil Rights Act passed.
Wow.
Within 6 days. So yes, I completely agree that like looting shouldn't aim for the small businesses, especially like those owned by ethnic minorities. I do still feel like it's quite an effective way. So like even, you know, the Target in Minneapolis, that's everybody was going on about how it went up in flames. The Target CEO himself went ahead and put out a statement saying he was going to then go ahead and provide resources to all the protesters. He was going to give water, provisions, whatever they needed, because he knew that he could build that up again easily. So all these big corporations, they all have insurance. They've all got millions of dollars on the back of their hand that they can use to rebuild all these places. But the point is for them to actually get the attention of what they want. And I do get what you mean, that, you know, there needs to be some sort of leader and there needs to be some sort of change. And like what actually wants to happen needs to happen. Because at the moment, I was having this discussion with one of my mum's white friends yesterday, and she was like, but I just don't understand, what are they trying to come about? Like what's the aim of these protests? And like, as we all understand it, we want systematic change. We want the institutions to actually fundamentally change so that it's not inherently biased towards a white person. But a lot of people don't seem to understand that and don't seem to grasp that just as easily.
Yeah.
They don't seem to grasp it because they've never been affected by it.
With the whole rioting and stuff, like I'm definitely conflicted about it as well. But what I know is that like I refuse to condemn the rioting, because I hate this like white scrutiny of like, I don't know, they're trying to be objective. It's like, oh, well, I'm all high and mighty because like I objectively would do this and rationally I would do this. But it's like you're so emotionally detached to the point where like these systems are perpetuated, and that's why they keep going, because they're so emotionally detached. So
I was also going to say with like looting and stuff like that, what Misha said is really important, because at the end of the day, like all of the buildings that are being looted, like the Targets and stuff like that, they're going to be able to be replaced, you know what I mean? Whereas like human lives and the hurt and trauma that people go through because of this oppression is always going to be there unless we go about and change it. And I feel like the only way that we'll actually be able to do that is through these like protests and maybe even like a revolution, because that's how a lot of revolutions have started, like through violence. That's how a lot of change has been made.
How capitalist is it for like our society to condemn the destruction of private property more than a human?
We often tend to value private property more than actual people's lives, and through looting and stuff like that is kind of like going to impact the economy, is going to impact all of the stuff that people like actually seem to care about, you know what I mean? And I feel like that will be enough for there to be change, if that makes sense, because that's all that Trump seems to care about, the economy.
And actually, like, having heard all of your points, like, I completely agree with the whole like looting against like the big companies and all of this and all that, because when you actually do look historically, the only time that white men in power actually seem to care is when the economy takes a hit. That's like, I think that's fundamental. And then to see this to continue over like, let's just say a month, for example, like that's going to damage the economy like no man's business. Like, and I feel like it's going to enforce change. But then again, like there's obviously the part about small businesses and like all of that becoming confuddled, like, in the whole mix.
When Danielle said how people care more about property and private property and whatnot, when looking at human lives, especially in America, Black people aren't viewed, they're dehumanized. They're not viewed as having humanity. Like, and that's why so many people in America are so overtly and covertly racist. And it's like, I feel like in the media especially, Black people are viewed as a form of entertainment. It's like, cool, I want to be like that. I want to have the Black style. And so people only support it when they're getting something out of it and they're part of the trend in fashion. And with the whole Blackout Tuesday, as much as I saw solidarity between everyone, it warmed my heart. What really pissed me off is I saw so many, and predominantly white people, posting Black Screen Blackout Tuesday, and they had never said a word on racism.
I had that as well.
They want to fit in with the people, and it's like, but you are still the problem, because you're either ignorant about it or you don't believe in the movement.
That's something I wanted to bring up, because people like jumping on the trend but like appreciating Black culture so much that like I'd see so many white people on Instagram, and you scroll through their feeds, you see so much like blackfishing, like excessive fake tans, make themselves appear like
Racially
more compatible. Yeah, like that. And like enjoying like hip hop and all that sort of stuff, where it's like that's someone else's culture but you don't care about the people.
Black culture is a form of entertainment. It always has been. Back when you had the whole Jim Crow, when it was overtly racist blackface, that was a form of entertainment. And now it's more covertly, more socially acceptable form of entertainment, because we're gonna have, you know, like Black celebrities and Black artists who become a part of this trend, but it's still the same bloody thing.
And then people don't see it. They're just like, oh well, slavery was abolished, so like racism doesn't exist.
That really takes off. Like when people are like, oh, can we just get over it? Like, slavery was however many years ago. And I'm like, fundamentally, slavery is the exact reason why this injustice exists. And the fact that a man in 2020 can literally put his knee on someone's neck in an 8 minutes, I think it was 42 seconds video, and like that was acceptable, like for him to do, because it wasn't just one person. It's not just him, this officer. He is an example, a symbol of so many different white people in the police department, in like government, in so many different things. Like, he is the representative of that. So whilst everyone's like, oh, it was just one man, like, why are we doing this over one? It's not just one man. It is systemic. It is a massive problem in America which needs to be rooted out. And you can't root out a problem that you've not even talked about, especially by the original oppressors, if you want to say, like the white people of the country. And it goes back to what I said about Reconstruction. Reconstruction after slavery wasn't Reconstruction as you may think for the Black people, the people that have been affected. It was Reconstruction. It was recompensation for the slave owners. It was like an apology, like, oh, sorry, you've lost your businesses. It was a dehumanization of Black people. Despite having abolished slavery, you're still living in a system of oppression, because what can you do? Like, the Great Migration, you move up to the north because the South is still predominantly racist, but then you move up to the north and the Black people are moving away from your areas. You're creating the urban ghettos, like ghettoization. You're putting people in a fundamental place of lack of financial security, lack of actual good education, like, and all of these systems have been perpetuated through the years because there has not been the fundamental change and recompensation for those people.
100% You snapped on that one.
Literally, it was just, oh, you know, you're free now. But it's like, are you not going to actually address the trauma that they went through and all of the stuff that happened to them? And I remember reading also about cultural appropriation and like the history of braids and stuff like that. And like before they even boarded the ships, the traffickers shaved like women's heads in order to take away their, like, the women's link to the homeland.
Yeah.
It basically stripped them away from their humanity and culture. And now it's the same people who are now appropriating their hair and saying that it's okay. And I think it's also crazy how the same hairstyle that they used to be oppressed for, and are still are, because like a lot of my friends have said that they have to kind of like assimilate and wear kind of certain hairstyles to work because it's not considered acceptable in their workplace. And I think that's kind of disgusting. So yeah.
And following on from that, with like the workplace and in environments as such, I think I was watching a video on it, and especially with black hair, for some reason, people who are not black have this whole, oh, can I touch it? Or don't even ask. Just kind of, you see it sometimes and you're like, that is an invasion of privacy. Like, what are you doing?
When you mentioned that and the whole assimilation to the culture, like the white culture that you're a part of, that really like struck me, because even in my own school, like, that, you know, the whole idea of like the fade, and that's predominantly part of like black culture, like and been like part of black hairstyles for a very long time, right? But slowly but surely it's become into mainstream kind of like fashion and hair like styles in a way. So anyway, my head teacher one time was looking at all the guys' hairstyles, and he was like, basically, we're gonna ban this hairstyle. And then everyone was like, what the fuck, what are you doing? Like, why? And he was like, because it's related to gang activity. And for me, like, when I heard that, my friend came to me like and was just like, yeah, none of us are allowed fades, despite your color, despite whatever. You're not allowed a fade because it's related to gang activity. And that ticked like so many levels of anger for me, because I was like, how can you justify saying that, especially as the head of a school? How can you justify saying that a hairstyle typically related to black culture and to their history, you're going to say that is related to gang activity? Like, that completely like baffled me. And again, it goes back to the systemic problem of people who are in charge, who are predominantly white most of the time, not having a cultural awareness, which really pissed me off.
Yeah, my cousin had the exact same problem, and she's like sharing on her story, like, get the message around, and she's from London as well, and she's like, get the message around, like, this teacher enforced this policy.
Yeah, and it's just horrible to see, because again, like, that's an example of, well, I go to predominantly brown schools, so even though that wasn't targeted at like a black people, for example, it was still a generalized like target to black culture. But there's also been people in schools who have gone in with their braids, with their natural hair, and like their afros and this that, and have literally been told that no, that is unprofessional, you can't come in with that hairstyle because it doesn't conform to our standards. Your standards, your Eurocentric standards, I'm sorry that this person's natural beautiful hair doesn't conform to your fucking standards, but you need to get rid of that archaic mentality and start imposing legislation which says, you know what, that is professional because that's your culture and that's who you are.
When you see white people come in with dreads or braids, that is your white privilege, because you're not getting demonized for wearing it, but a black person whose culture it's from gets demonized for wearing it.
Yeah. Celebrities are like wearing the hairstyles, like box braids, for example, and having like their cornrows or doing whatever cultural appropriation they be doing. They usually have this kind of like defense, this kind of like, oh well, why can't I wear this hairstyle? Like, it's just a hairstyle. And it's like, that statement is just a hairstyle. It's not just a hairstyle. That hairstyle is related to like a completely rich history of beauty, but also oppression, because people have been oppressed for their hairstyles, like the shaving of their heads. Like, and also you mentioned like obviously before boarding the slave ships that they had to shave their heads. I also saw another thing where, maybe prior to that, but where the women would put like grains of rice in their hair, so like they braided grains of rice and like anything like nuts or like gold and stuff, so they had like a point of sustenance so they could have it on the slave ships. And that for me was really important, because I was like, for you it's a hairstyle, it's like a fashionable thing, but for this person it's related to their history, to their culture. And because of the obviously taking of millions of people from Africa over to the Americas and stuff, a lot of that history was lost. So then to be able to even connect your history in some sort of way with your hairstyle is really significant and important. And then for someone to take that history away from you, and then to take that hairstyle away from you and be like, it's fashion, it's like, it's not just fashion, it's related to something important.
100%. I feel like if you can appreciate the culture, like for me anyways, personally, like if you can appreciate my culture and understand its roots, go ahead and wear something to my culture. If you're appreciating, if you're appropriating, doing it for the fashion, for the Instagram likes, you can fuck off.
If you're calling them like boxer braids or bow braids or Kim Kardashian braids, then absolutely not.
Before, they used to even use they used to like do their hairstyles in certain ways in order to use it as like a map to kind of like escape or to meet someone.
I saw a version on a documentary about cultural appropriation where it was more like the family sentiment to it. So it's like when they were younger, they had like their parents teaching them how to do like twists and cornrows, and they'd practice on their mops and stuff. And that's like a really nice family sentiment. But for people to have it as just like a financial entity of fashion, like kind of undermines that really nice backing to it.
Yeah, like there was a lot of history behind the braids. For example, a lot of people, when you would have like a certain like hairstyle, you would be able to tell what tribe you were from. There's history behind it. Another like kind of issue is when someone doesn't know whether something is wrong or not and they end up doing it, a lot of people just say, oh, you shouldn't do that, but then kind of don't explain it. But then the flip side to that is like, they shouldn't need to explain to you why it's wrong. You should kind of know it already. And I think links to the next question that I wanted to bring up, like, I guess, like, why do you think people are so reluctant to learn about Black history and racism in general?
They don't know that they need to. If white people are expecting like others to like censor their languages, to like euphemize the effects of colonialism, slavery and everything, like isn't white privilege, then I don't know what it is. Like it's not Black people's responsibility to educate you.
Yeah.
People don't want the accusation of being brandished racist, and it's great that we've got these democratic rights, which is like freedom of speech, freedom of choice, free and fair elections and stuff, but people use it as a way to negate responsibility. So I don't know, when I was like saying to people, have you signed the petition, they'll be like, oh, you're nagging me or whatever. Like, it's my freedom of choice or whatever. Like, even in the general election, I'll be like, do you understand how racist Boris Johnson is? They're like, well, it's my freedom of choice. But that's used as a way to just like negate responsibility and not do research.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I think also a lot of people say, oh, what's like one signature going to do? What's one vote going to do? But it's like, there are so many people with that mentality out there. And if all of them kind of came together to understand that, like to understand the impact that their one vote, their one signature would have, it would have a massive kind of like influence and actually create change. But people don't really understand that.
Yeah.
I genuinely feel for some people, more working class white people, it does stem from racism, and as you said, people don't want to be labelled as racist. It's not like the thing you want people to be known. You don't want to be seen negatively in the public eye. And I think one way people hide racism is, have you guys seen the movie Get Out?
Yeah.
Right. So it was directed by one of the comedians, is like Key and Peele or something. But anyways, the movie, what it was to show about was actually the extent of white liberals. So those who are like, no, yeah, we accept, you know, the Black culture, we accept Black people, we're not racist. But it shows how their acceptance of the Black culture is still in effect racist, and it becomes more of, and basically in the movie they want to like put the white person's brain in the Black guy's brain so he can have the Black guy's body and abilities and everything. It's like a weird praise of it, but it's still a form of their racism.
And it's when people try to say like, oh, I don't see colour, but it's like, well, then you don't see my ancestors' history, you don't see what people encounter day to day, you don't see the statistics of disproportionality with Black people being preyed on, not just in general, but by institutions.
Yeah.
And I think also what you were saying is kind of relevant to how people say, oh, like, you don't sound Black, and that kind of thing. It's like another form of like racism, you know what I mean? Like my friend has had that said to her so many times, like, you don't sound Black. You're so well spoken for someone who is Black, and it's kind of like, what? Like,
what color of my skin got to do with the way I articulate myself? Like, it's like,
yeah, someone said to me, like, they were trying to describe this person to me, and they basically said like, oh yeah, you can tell they're like not from this country, and I was just like, that's not the same thing. It's like there's a difference between nationality and race.
Yeah.
Do you know my favorite like logic is when white men go, I'm not racist because I've slept with a Black girl. I'm not racist.
No, it's so bad.
Fetishize us. That is what you do. Like, you're still.
No, that happened literally in a politics classroom, a room where we're supposed to be intellectual, supposed to be deep thinking, understand everything that goes on. And so someone literally said like, I'm not racist because my best friend is mixed race.
Yeah, that argument literally just bewilders me. I'm like, just shut the fuck up. Just because you're not racist does not mean that you don't have racial prejudice and biases. Like, when you cross the road, when you see a group of black men, but you wouldn't do the same if you saw a group of white men. Like,
Yeah, and racism is like, it's not just an attitude, like it's your actions, it's those microaggressions.
exactly. The Asian and like predominantly brown South Indian community, in terms of like the way a lot of people I hear like, oh, I'm not racist because I do this, I'm not racist because I have friends, I'm not racist because that. But then when you're sitting at the dinner table and like your Bobby's talking to you and you're just like, oh, so you've got a boyfriend, and you like say to them, oh yeah, I've got a boyfriend. Oh, so what's he like? And you don't one time mention that he's black, or the fact that you keep someone a secret because you know that your family is not going to be that accepting of it. And instead of teaching and educating and being like, no, your views are wrong, instead you hide in this bubble of like, I'm going to protect myself and like on this until the relationship ends, because then I can have a story that I dated a black guy. Or you can be like, there's just so many examples I couldn't even get into.
No, literally same.
Amount of racism in the South Asian community towards black people, like it is immense. Like, and it's so deep rooted in the culture, and it's taken from the white view of black culture.
Yeah, I feel like as a brown community as well, we try to assimilate to the white culture that we're surrounded by. So in order to do that, we try to perpetuate their attitudes and
Exactly.
especially in like the communities that we're talking about. And like literally, it's not just like our great grandmas that are thinking this. It's our grandmas, it's our aunties, it's our uncles, it's our parents. And it's like, for example, I know a lot of people of like Asian heritage who are born here who still have those proper archaic like mentalities. And it's not just we need to just reform, it's everyone who's not black needs to reform in their own communities, I think. And get rid of that, because even in a lot of like South American communities and like the mentality of like being darker again, colorism, or just being black, you're constantly viewed as lesser, which needs to be eradicated.
Yeah, and with like colorism, you see in the Asian community, you have skin lightening creams. And
what's crazy to me is that there was this one woman who injected so much melanin into her skin that she then identified herself as black. And it's like,
transracial, like you want to take the parts of African culture that you like and black culture that you like, but you're going to leave away all the parts that you don't like. And I remember seeing like a quote in a museum one time, and I can't remember like who wrote it or whatever, but it was literally just along the lines of, people want to come and take my culture for the good parts, but they want to leave everything that makes us like who we are in a way, like all the things that they've deemed bad, like not Eurocentric enough and stuff like that. So it's like when you see Zendaya like on the cover of however many magazines or whatever, because she is like tasteful to the white community in terms of like her skin, like she has her hair a particular way, like she looks more like what they want rather than what representative of the larger like black community in a way, if you get what I'm trying to say. But again, it goes back down to colorism. If we've come so far in terms of like historically and like where we are today, we could go even further to the extent where this could one day not be a problem. That's completely optimistic, and like I understand how difficult that's been hundreds of years, but I like to be optimistic in that sense. So I feel like more education needs to be, like the education system first of all needs to stop regarding its own history and as the most important, like as being compulsory, and instead take on world history as being important. I don't know. What do you think?
Loads of people think Churchill wasn't even a racist.
Yeah. Oh my god. I love history. Like I want to study at uni as well, right? So my history teachers, like they're sick. I love them, but the reason, like, there's curriculums that you can choose, right? And then each school gets to choose which modules they're going to do and like whatever. So I remember going to King's College for like an open day one time, and I'd sat in like the history lecture, and then I literally asked this guy, who was like, I don't know what the question was, but my response was like, because our systems, what we learn is the white man's history. Like we don't get to learn like the actual history of India. We don't get to learn like the rich history of Africa. Instead, we learn slavery, we learn oppression, but we don't even just like learn that. That is like a slither of the like, percent course. Like my history teacher one time was also just like, yeah, but Tanisha, you need to understand like you're in England and you need to understand like the history of the UK. And like, I was a bit like, okay, I'm gonna let you go for that one, but I'm gonna like give you my perspective. So whilst I understand that we're in the UK and we need to learn like about the Victorians and the Stuarts and our constitution and this and the democracy, I do feel like it's important to understand like British and white culpability in all the bad things they did. Like, I remember learning about the British Empire and like it was like a positive outlook. I look back as an 18-year-old person and looking to like 12-year-old me learning that, and I was like, oh, that's so cool. Look at what Britain did. And I'm like, no. Obviously, you're learning what they want you to learn, but it also kind of puts you in a box. Like, unless you're taught to be creative and you're taught to like look outside your spectrum, which we weren't taught in secondary school I went to, like,
we need to see more subjects of like pseudosciences like sociology and psychology introduced into schools, because that is where you learn, like sociology GCSE, I did at A-level and GCSE. I learned about the racism in schools, racism in society. You learn about social inequality, class inequality. You learn about gender inequality, and it wakes you up. And and pseudosciences, they're not favoured by a lot of conservative politicians and a lot of ones that do with like the education and national curriculum, because it wakes the young mass up to see, no, look, this is what society is really like.
Yeah, there's so much debate around the whole education stuff, but sociology would be a really good way of enforcing that.
But I feel like the thing with sociology and pseudosciences, they're so stigmatized. Like, for example, in my school specifically, if you're like, I'm doing sociology, someone's like, oh, so you're a dickhead then, like, you don't know anything.
Yeah.
Stigma is just like, do you understand what sociology is? Like, do you understand, like, it's the study of society, and to understand the society you're a part of is so vital. And just, I don't know where the stigma has come from, but it needs to be completely like eradicated.
Yeah, and it changed the way I viewed so much as a child, especially because I started doing it at age 13, and that's when you're most like influenced by ideologies and beliefs in creating your own self.
The value of a subject be determined by its difficulty rather than its importance.
Yeah.
Sociology is hard, by the way. It is lots of essays and writing. I don't know where the stigma comes from.
100%. Like, I remember doing sociology, and you had to learn a good like 50 sociologists just for like one paper. Not even one paper, like one section of a paper. And the other thing with sociology is that when we covered like inequalities, research inequalities, you didn't just look at like statistics and like trends of the inequalities, but you also looked at kind of like reasons for it, and
it's really eye-opening.
Same with psychology. Psychology teaches you about the way people conform in society, the way people are indoctrinated in society, and conservative views are so against these pseudosciences, and that's why they're so stigmatized by the media and whatnot, because those in power don't want you to wake up and don't want you to see y'all are being played.
I think the last thing that we should just kind of talk about is kind of like moving forward.
We need to eat the rich.
Basically.
Like a rich, but yeah, that's true. I feel like it needs to start from like a young age. Like the next generation don't grow up having like racial biases and prejudices and like conforming to the beliefs set by the system. So in education, instead of having 28 days for Black History Month, you need to be having that as like a core part of the curriculum, and not because you need to learn that if we're going to take the concept of, oh, you need to learn Britishness and British like history, then you need to learn every aspect of it, not just the biased view that the white conservative Tories want you to believe. Not that part. We want to learn about its entirety and not just from a biased perspective. And I think the same goes for every like school curriculum, westernized. Like, for example, in America as well, like that curriculum is put in place to unravel the seeds that have been sowed so many years ago.
So I think the exact same, but what's been really getting to me and making me feel like almost hopeless with this whole situation is like those kind of policies come around through a consensus in society because of the way democracy is. And it's like that policy is what would create that consensus, but you got to get consensus first to enforce it.
Yeah.
So I'm just like, how's it going to happen?
I think from that perspective then, because I think from the duration of this conversation, what I've understood is like, when we reflect on like historical events and stuff, and I do think a revolution is due without sounding radical, but like, oh shit.
No, I really, really think we need to revolt. We need a whole Marx in power communism. We need to like actually burn the place to the ground.
So thank you for listening to this episode. I hope you enjoyed the conversation. and either learned something or found something to disagree with us on. However, that being said, that's it from us today. Like, comment, subscribe, and tune in for our next episode.